The rain fell in a steady rhythm that night, the kind that seemed to wash away the noise of the city until only the sound of footsteps and thunder remained. Neon lights flickered across puddles, painting the wet streets in streaks of blue and red. It was close to midnight, the hour when most decent people were already asleep and the lost ones wandered looking for something they couldn't name. Lily was one of them that night. Her red dress clung to her in the rain, her hair sticking to her face as she stumbled out of the last open bar on the street. Her lipstick was smudged, her mascara running, and her laughter had long since turned into quiet sobs. The heel of her shoe snapped, and she nearly fell against the cold brick wall behind her. She didn't even care. Everything hurt. Her heart, her pride, her trust, all bruised beyond repair. Earlier that night she had promised herself just one drink, but pain never listened to promises. One turned into 5, and soon she couldn't even remember what she was drinking or who had offered to buy it. All she knew was that the bar felt too small for her sadness and too loud for her thoughts. So she'd left, ignoring the bartender's concerned look. She needed air, she told herself. She needed space. But space was the last thing the city gave her. The alley she wandered into was darker than the others. The streetlights broken, the shadows too thick to tell where they began. Still, she kept walking, clutching her purse, the sound of her heels clicking unevenly on the wet pavement. She didn't notice the figures that detached themselves from the wall until one of them spoke. "Well, what do we have here?" The voice was smooth but sharp, like glass under silk. Lily froze. There were 3 of them, all men, all smiling the same way predators do when they've already decided the ending. She tried to straighten herself, tried to sound sober. "I'm fine," she murmured, her voice shaky. "Just going home." One of them laughed and stepped closer. "Looks like you need some help getting there." The others chuckled, closing in from both sides. Her heart pounded. The alcohol made her limbs feel heavy, her mind slow. She took a step back, but her foot hit a puddle and she slipped, landing hard on the cold ground. Pain shot up her arm and she winced. The men loomed over her now, their shadows stretching long in the dim light. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. That was when another voice cut through the darkness. "That's enough." It wasn't loud, but it carried authority, the kind that made people stop without knowing why. The 3 men turned, their faces tightening. A figure stood at the far end of the alley, half hidden beneath the dripping edge of a black coat. The glow of a cigarette burned faintly between his fingers. He moved closer, unhurried, and as the light caught his face, Lily could see the sharp line of his jaw, the cold steel of his eyes. He looked like someone carved out of the night itself, dangerous, deliberate, and unshakable. "Mind your own business," one of the men barked, though his voice wasn't as confident as before. The stranger stopped a few feet away, flicking his cigarette into the rain. His tone didn't change. "Walk away." One of them sneered, pulling a small knife from his pocket. "And what if we don't?" The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then, in one smooth motion, his coat shifted just enough for the streetlight to catch the glint of a gun tucked inside. The men froze. No words were needed. One cursed under his breath, grabbing his friend's shoulder. "Forget it, man. Let's go." Within seconds, their footsteps faded down the alley, leaving only the rain and the echo of fear behind them. For a long moment, Lily just sat there, shivering. The stranger walked toward her slowly, his boots splashing through puddles. He crouched beside her, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. Up close, his voice lost its edge. It was deep, calm, almost soothing. Lily tried to focus on his face, but her vision blurred again. "Are you my guardian angel?" she asked with a weak laugh that turned into a hiccup. The corner of his mouth twitched as if he wasn't sure whether to smile or sigh. "Something like that," he muttered. Without another word, he slid one arm behind her back and the other under her knees, lifting her effortlessly off the ground. She didn't resist. Her head rested against his chest and she could hear the steady beat of his heart beneath the damp fabric of his shirt. The scent of rain and tobacco clung to him, mixed with something darker, something she couldn't place. "Where are you taking me?" she murmured, her words slurring. "Somewhere safe," he replied. She tried to open her eyes again, but the motion of his steps and the warmth of his hold made her too tired to care. The alley disappeared behind them as he carried her through the rain-soaked streets, passing empty stores and dim streetlights that flickered weakly. When he reached a sleek black car parked at the corner, a man in a suit stepped out from the driver's seat looking startled. "Boss, who—" The stranger gave him a look that ended the question before it began. "Drive," he said. The driver nodded quickly and opened the back door. He set Lily down gently inside, covering her with his coat. Her breathing evened out as exhaustion finally took over. He watched her for a long moment, his expression hard but his eyes betraying something softer, something human. "She's just a kid," the driver muttered quietly. "She's lucky you found her first." The man didn't reply. He lit another cigarette, exhaling slowly as he looked out at the rain. The car pulled away from the curb, the city lights blurring past. For the first time that night, the streets seemed quiet. Lily slept soundly, unaware of the man beside her. The man whose name would send others running, the man whose hands were far too used to blood and danger. He glanced at her once more before turning away. "You shouldn't have been there," he said under his breath, almost to himself. But deep down, even he knew it wasn't just luck that brought him to that alley. Something about the girl in the red dress had made him stop. Something about her had made the ruthless Adrian Moretti, the man who feared nothing, pause in the rain and choose for one night to save instead of destroy. The morning came softly, with sunlight bleeding through the thin white curtains, brushing over Lily's face and pulling her from the depths of uneasy dreams. For a few seconds she didn't know where she was. The bed beneath her was too soft, the sheets too clean, the faint smell of tobacco and expensive cologne lingering in the air. Her head throbbed, the dull pain of a hangover pounding behind her eyes. She groaned and pressed her palms against her temples, trying to piece together what had happened the night before. All she remembered was rain, voices, fear, and a man with eyes like storm clouds. When she opened her eyes fully, the room around her came into focus. It was spacious but not cluttered, decorated in shades of charcoal and ivory. Everything looked expensive but impersonal, as though it was meant to impress rather than comfort. There were no photographs, no flowers, no traces of life, just cold elegance. The sound of the city was faint beyond the tall windows, muffled by thick glass. She sat up slowly, wincing as the room tilted for a moment. She was still wearing her red dress, though someone had draped a blanket over her. Her shoes were gone, set neatly by the side of the bed. Her heart began to race as panic rose in her chest. She didn't know this place. What if the man who had saved her hadn't saved her at all? What if she'd traded one danger for another? She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, gripping the nearest table for balance. Her purse sat on a nearby chair unopened. Nothing seemed missing, but that didn't calm her much. She tiptoed toward the door and pressed her ear against it. Silence except for the faint hum of a refrigerator somewhere beyond. Gathering her courage, she turned the handle slowly and peeked out. The apartment was larger than she expected. An open space with tall ceilings, dark furniture, and a wall of glass overlooking the city skyline. It was beautiful in an intimidating way. Everything was neat, deliberate, controlled. A faint sound came from the kitchen, the soft clink of a cup being set down. Her breath caught as she turned her head toward it. The man from last night stood there facing away from her. He was dressed in a dark shirt now, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing strong forearms and a watch that probably cost more than her rent for a year. His hair was still damp and steam curled from the coffee mug he held in one hand. He turned slowly when he heard her footsteps. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stop. There was no trace of threat in his face now, only calm detachment. The kind that came from someone who'd seen far too much to be easily surprised. "You're awake," he said, his tone low and even. Lily swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "Where am I?" she asked. "My place," he replied simply. "You were drunk and alone last night. It wasn't safe to leave you there." Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She looked away, clutching the blanket around her. "I'm sorry. I must have caused trouble." His lips twitched slightly, not quite a smile. "You nearly did," he said. "But I've dealt with worse." He walked over to the counter and poured another cup of coffee, then slid it across the table toward her. "Drink. You'll feel better." She hesitated but stepped forward, her hands trembling as she took the cup. The warmth of it grounded her, and she sipped carefully. It was strong and bitter, but comforting in a strange way. After a few moments, she dared to glance at him again. Up close, he looked even more striking. The sharp planes of his face, the faint scar running along his jaw, the cold gray eyes that seemed to see everything. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at the edge of her memory. She tried to think of where she might have seen that face before. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow drag from his cigarette, exhaled, and said, "Adrian." Just that. No last name, no explanation. But there was weight behind the word, as if he was used to people reacting to it. Lily nodded awkwardly. "I'm Lily," she said, her voice small in the wide, quiet room. "I figured," he said, nodding toward her purse. "Your ID fell out when I picked it up." That should have made her nervous, but somehow it didn't. There was a strange kind of safety in his presence. Even though everything about him warned her he wasn't someone to trust easily. "Thank you," she said softly, "for last night. I don't even know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." His eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. "You should be more careful," he said. "Not everyone in this city stops to help." The way he said it made her wonder if he was speaking from experience. She wanted to ask more, to understand who he really was, but something in his expression told her not to. He finished his coffee, stubbed out his cigarette, and stood. "There's food in the kitchen," he said. "Eat something before you go. I'll have someone drive you home." "You're not staying?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked at her with that same detached calm. "I have business to handle." He walked toward the door, grabbing a coat from the hanger. "Wait," she called after him. "Why did you help me?" He paused, his hand on the door handle. For a long time he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, without turning around, "Because no one else did." And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Lily sat at the table, staring at the untouched plate of toast he'd left. She traced the edge of the coffee cup with her finger, lost in thought. Who was this man who appeared from the shadows like some dark guardian and vanished just as easily? His voice echoed in her mind, steady and controlled, but beneath it she'd heard something else. A tiredness, a sadness that didn't belong to a stranger. As she wandered through the apartment, she noticed little things that told her more about him than words could. A bookshelf lined with old novels and law books. A piano in the corner covered with dust. A framed photograph turned face down on a table. He lived surrounded by beauty but untouched by it. There were no signs of warmth, no laughter in these walls. Only loneliness carefully hidden behind wealth and order. By the time a black car pulled up outside and a driver knocked gently to tell her she was being taken home, Lily still couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into something far larger than herself. She didn't know that the man who had saved her wasn't just another stranger. She didn't know that the name Adrian carried power, fear, and a history drenched in blood. All she knew was that when he'd looked at her for a moment, the darkness in his eyes had softened, and she couldn't explain why that memory felt like the beginning of something she wasn't ready to understand. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Lily went through the motions. showering, changing, making tea, but her mind stayed stuck on the man named Adrian. The scent of his apartment clung to her clothes, that faint trace of smoke and rain, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw his expression, the unreadable calm in his gray eyes, the quiet authority in his voice. It made no sense. He had saved her, yes, but there was something about him that didn't fit. No ordinary man carried that kind of stillness, that quiet danger that made even the air around him hold its breath. She tried to brush it off, to tell herself it didn't matter who he was. But curiosity has a way of clawing its way back. When she returned home, her roommate Jenna nearly screamed in relief. "Oh my God, where have you been?" she demanded, throwing her arms around her. "You didn't come home last night. I thought something happened to you." Lily managed a weak smile. "I'm fine. Someone helped me. I was drunk and—" Jenna pulled back, eyes wide. "Someone helped you? Who?" Lily hesitated. "His name's Adrian. He found me in an alley. I must have passed out. He let me stay at his place for the night." Jenna frowned. "That sounds sketchy. You sure you're okay?" Lily nodded. "Yeah, he didn't do anything. He was just strange." She didn't know how else to describe him. Dangerous, maybe, but not cruel. Still, something inside her itched for answers. After Jenna left for work, Lily sat on the couch scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone. She told herself she was just trying to distract herself, but her thumb hovered over the search bar longer than it should have. Finally, she typed his name, Adrian. Then she paused. What was his last name? He hadn't said. She frowned, trying again. Adrian, black coat, scar jawline, New York. The results were useless. So she dropped it, tossing her phone aside and deciding to forget it. But fate had other plans. Later that evening, as she was cooking dinner, Jenna's voice echoed from the living room. "Lily, you need to see this." Something in her tone made Lily rush over, wiping her hands on a towel. The TV was on, tuned to the evening news. The anchor's voice was sharp, serious. "Breaking tonight," the woman said. "Police continue their search for Adrian Moretti, alleged leader of the Moretti crime syndicate. Authorities describe him as armed and highly dangerous." Lily's blood turned to ice. She stared at the photo on the screen, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The face staring back at her was the same one that had looked down at her in the rain. The same eyes, the same scar, the same calm intensity. Jenna turned toward her, jaw slack. "Lily, that's him, isn't it?" "That's the guy who helped you?" Lily couldn't speak. She could only nod, her throat tight. The world seemed to tilt around her, the room spinning as she tried to process what she was seeing. A mafia boss, a man wanted by the police, a criminal who had carried her in his arms like she was something fragile. It didn't make sense. Nothing about him had felt like that. He hadn't hurt her, hadn't even asked her name beyond what he already knew. He'd been quiet, distant, careful. Jenna was still talking, pacing now. "You have to call the police. Lily, he could have killed you. You could have been on the news too." But Lily wasn't listening. Her mind replayed every detail. The way he'd shielded her from the rain, the gentleness in his touch, the low voice that had sounded more tired than threatening. She thought about the way he'd said because no one else did. Could a man like that really be a monster? Or was there something more to the story the news wasn't telling? That night after Jenna went to bed, Lily sat on her balcony staring out at the city lights. The cold air bit at her skin, but she didn't move. She couldn't stop thinking about him. She told herself she was being stupid. He was dangerous, hunted, everything she should stay away from. But her heart didn't seem to understand what her mind already knew. She pulled out her phone again and opened the article about him. The words blurred as she read them. Organized crime, extortion, smuggling, murder. The last one made her flinch. She whispered the word to herself, trying to imagine the same man with a gun in his hand. Not to protect, but to destroy. She couldn't. She read further. Adrian Moretti, 34, heir to one of New York's most powerful underground families, disappeared from police radar 3 years ago. Rumors suggest he operates behind a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. There was a picture of him at some charity gala years ago, clean-shaven, wearing a tuxedo, smiling like he belonged among the wealthy elite. It was hard to believe it was the same man who'd carried her through the rain. Lily closed her phone, leaning her head back against the wall. Her chest ached with something she couldn't name. Fear, maybe, confusion, but also gratitude. He had saved her. Whatever he was, whatever he had done, she couldn't deny that. She didn't know why he had chosen to help her, but he had. And the memory of that night, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his coat, had burned itself into her mind. The next day she went to work, trying to pretend everything was normal. But it wasn't. The world suddenly felt different, sharper, like danger lurked in every shadow. She caught herself glancing over her shoulder on the subway, wondering if someone was watching her. What if the police traced her to him? What if his enemies did? The thought made her stomach twist. Yet underneath the fear was something even more dangerous. A longing to see him again. Every sound reminded her of that night. The rain tapping against the window. The faint scent of smoke that sometimes drifted through the air. The way the city seemed quieter when the clock struck midnight. She found herself walking past the street where he'd found her, as if hoping to see that black coat emerging from the dark again. She hated herself for it. She told herself she just wanted closure, to understand why he'd helped her. But the truth ran deeper. In the days that followed, Lily's life seemed to return to normal, but her thoughts never did. She stopped drinking, stopped going out at night, yet she also stopped sleeping peacefully. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those gray eyes staring back at her, as if they were calling her into a world she didn't belong to. And though she didn't realize it yet, her path had already been set the moment she'd stumbled into that alley. The moment Adrian Moretti had looked at her, her life had changed course forever. The nights grew colder after that, and with every passing day the memory of Adrian only dug deeper into Lily's mind. She tried to forget him. She told herself she had to. A man like that, wanted, feared, untouchable, didn't belong in her life. But forgetting him was like trying to erase a scar. Every time the rain fell, she thought of that night, of the way he had appeared out of nowhere and lifted her from the ground like she was something worth saving. She would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain she'd heard footsteps outside her window, only to find silence waiting. She wasn't sure if she was afraid he'd come back or afraid that he never would. One evening, a week after seeing his face on the news, she left work later than usual. The city was shrouded in mist, the streets glistening under the dull glow of streetlights. She pulled her coat tighter and hurried home, lost in thought when a black car pulled up beside the sidewalk. Her pulse jumped. The back door opened and a tall figure stepped out. Even before she saw his face, she knew. That stillness in the air, that quiet authority that seemed to silence the world. It could only be him. Adrian stood under the glow of a flickering streetlight, his dark coat brushing against the wind. His eyes met hers, steady, unreadable. Lily froze. "Why are you here?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. The car door closed behind him with a heavy click, and the driver stayed inside, his face hidden. Adrian's gaze flickered to the street around them before returning to her. "Because you know who I am now," he said finally, his voice calm but heavy. "And people who know my face aren't usually safe." She took a step back, her breath quickening. "What does that mean?" He didn't move closer, but there was something in his tone that made her heart race faster. "The night I found you," he said, "someone saw. They think you're connected to me now." The words sank in slowly. She felt the world tilt beneath her. "Connected to you?" she repeated, barely able to form the words. "I don't even know you." His jaw tightened. "That doesn't matter to them." He looked past her then, scanning the rooftops, the street corners, the shadows that seemed to pulse with unseen life. "They'll come for you," he said quietly. "And I can't let that happen." Lily took a deep breath, torn between fear and disbelief. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk your life for me? You've already done enough." He didn't answer right away. For a moment he looked at her the way someone might look at a memory, something distant but impossible to forget. Then he said softly, "Because for once I wanted to save something good." His voice cracked at the edges just slightly, and for the first time she saw a glimpse of the man behind the legend. Not the Mafia boss, not the wanted criminal, but the man who had chosen, in that one brief moment, to be human. Before she could respond, the quiet of the night was shattered by the sound of screeching tires. A van turned sharply around the corner, its headlights cutting through the fog. Adrian's eyes snapped toward it instantly. "Get down!" he barked. She barely had time to move before he grabbed her and pushed her behind a parked car. The first shot rang out, a burst of glass and fire. She gasped as bullets ricocheted off metal. Adrian pulled a gun from inside his coat, his movements quick, practiced, controlled. He returned fire, the sharp flashes lighting up his face in brief, violent bursts. Lily's hands trembled as she pressed herself against the ground. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body wouldn't move. All she could do was watch as the man who had once carried her through the rain now stood between her and death again. Two of the attackers fell, the others retreating as sirens began to wail in the distance. Adrian turned toward her, his breathing steady despite the chaos. "We have to go," he said. He reached out his hand, but before she could take it, the red and blue lights appeared around the corner. Police cars, dozens of them. His expression hardened. "Adrian," she called, her voice cracking, but he shook his head. "You can't be seen with me." "But no, Lily." His tone left no room for argument. "They'll think you're one of mine. You have to go home. Forget this. Forget me." The sirens grew louder, echoing off the buildings. He glanced toward the alley beside them, then back at her. "You saved me," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Twice." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hurt to see. "You made me remember I could." And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows as the police swarmed the street. Lily stood frozen, the world spinning around her. An officer grabbed her arm, shouting questions, but she barely heard him. They asked about the shooting, about the man she had seen. She said nothing. She just stared into the darkness where he had vanished, her chest aching with a pain she couldn't explain. By the time they let her go, dawn was breaking, soft and cold. She walked home in silence, the city still humming with sirens behind her. Days passed. Weeks. The story of the shootout flooded the news. "Moretti escapes police trap again." The headlines read, "Manhunt continues." But no one mentioned the girl in the alley. No one knew her name, and she didn't want them to. She tried to move on, to go back to her old life, but everything felt different now. Every time she saw her reflection, she saw a stranger, someone who had looked into the eyes of a wanted man and seen something worth believing in. Then one morning, as winter crept into the city, she found a small package on her doorstep. There was no return address, no name, just her initials written neatly on the top. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a silver pendant, simple, elegant, and a folded note. She unfolded it slowly, her breath catching when she read the words, "You made me remember I was human once. Stay safe." Her tears fell silently, splattering onto the paper. She clutched the pendant to her chest, her heart aching and full all at once. Somewhere out there, he was still running, still fighting against a world that refused to let him be anything but the monster they believed he was. But she knew better, because she had seen the man beneath the name, the man who had chosen to protect her when he had every reason not to. Sometimes, on stormy nights, she would stand by her window and watch the rain fall, half hoping to see that black car again, half praying she never would. And though she never saw him after that night, she always felt him there, in the silence between thunder and the shadows that seemed to watch over her. He had saved her twice, but what he didn't know was that in his own way, she had saved him too.